Real estate investment loan amortization schedule worksheet with no tables, part number 3. Get ready because it's time to raise the stakes with real estate. Here we are in our Excel worksheet. If you have access to the Excel worksheet, would like to follow along, note that we have 3 tabs down at the bottom. We have the example tab, the practice tab, the blank tab. First, quick look at the example tab, which is in essence an answer key. We have the information on the left-hand side. We populated that into our blank tab, which is where we're working the practice problem in a prior presentation. Then we entered the data related to the amortization table. Now we're working on this component, which is to break that amortization table into a yearly summary as opposed to a monthly summary. That's what we will do this time. Remember that this second tab, the practice tab, is a tab that you can use to work through the practice problem where it's going to have some pre-formatted cells, which may make the data input a little bit easier. However, we're going to be doing this and continuing on in the blank tab, just formatting this from scratch from just an Excel worksheet, which we did in prior 2 presentations, entering the data, then the amortization table. So the data, you'll recall, home price, $500,000, 20% down payment. That means $100,000 down, $400,000 loan, 30-year loan we're assuming. That means 360 payments, 30 times 12. Those are the monthly payments. 5% on the yearly rate payment amount with our payment function. 2,147.29 about. We had the total payments and the total interest. We then entered our amortization table, which we broke out by years and months. However, the years are just giving us the idea of each payment that is in a particular year. And then we have the monthly amounts down below. And this goes all the way down to 360. Now, the next thing we might want to do is say, well, I'd like to see the total interest that I'm going to be paying per each year, for example, or the total loan reduction or the loan balance after each year has passed, and not have to scroll through this entire amortization table to say, okay, where will I stand at the end of year 2? Well, if I look at year 2, then I've got, my balance is going to be down here. So we might want to format this on a year-by-year basis, would be a typical kind of thing to do. So the other thing, just note that the interest will change from year over year. So if I was to add up the interest, for example, for the first year, let's do it right here just for an example. You don't have to do this because I'm going to delete it, but the interest would be this sum of the interest, which would be that 19,866. And then if I went down to year 2, at the bottom of year 2, and did the same thing, equals the sum of everything that's in year 2. That's one way I can go through and kind of figure this out. Notice I have different numbers here because the interest will be different. That's one of the things that could have an impact on other items such as taxes and so on. So I'm going to delete those 2 and say, well, how can I build like a table on a year-by-year basis to summarize this data in that way? This is one thing that the use of pivot tables or other kind of tables and splitters can help with. We'll do that in future presentations. Remember, here we're working without the pivot tables because they can be a little bit confusing. So we'll do it without first, which is going to be a little bit more difficult of a process to do, but easier conceptually to think about. And then we'll go back in and we will add the pivot tables in a future presentation and work with those more kind of tricky, but a lot more options with them on the pivots. So I'm going to add this set of data over here in column K. I want to have another space between these 2 data sets. So I'm going to make this column J a little bit less wide, putting our cursor between J and K, left click and dragging to the right. Now I'm going to have the same headings up top, but I'm not going to have the months here. We just want the years. And instead of having 12 1-year ones, I want to have just 1 year 1 with this summary data. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say this is going to be equal to, and I'll just pick up the years, and I'll just copy that over. And then this one, I'm going to say this is going to be the total payments. I'll make it a little bit different. I'll say total payments. And then this one, I'm going to call the total interest. And then I'll call this total loan reduction. And then I'll call this the ending balance. Now, the ending balance is going to be a little bit different because notice on the total payments, I'm going to sum up the total payments, which will basically be these. You can see the sum function to 21,767. The interest would be the sum of this for year 1. see the sum function 19,866. The loan reduction would be the sum of these for year 1. That's how much the loan's going to go down by for a year, 5901. But the loan balance isn't going to be like the sum of these. No, it's just going to be the last number down here. So that's going to be a little bit different when we think about how we're going to populate that information. Notice also I'm using 2 cells here when I'm going to have a header that's a little bit longer, because I'm not planning on putting this into a pivot table type of structure. So I think aesthetically, this looks nicer to do it when we do our little black and white thing over here. So I'm going to select these headers and do our header thing, which is typically going to be going to the alignment tab, center them, and then we'll make them black and white font group. Hit the bucket drop down, make it black, and then the text white, black and white. And so that covers up the fact that they have the 2 cells. We got that nice header without messing up any other cells with the wrapping of anything. Then we're going to have the years. Now the years, I want to summarize everything. So I need 1 to 30 years because it's a 30-year loan. So 1, 2. I'm going to select those 2 and drag it on down for 30 years using the trusty fill handle, dragging down 30 years. 30 years. Much smaller than 360. 30 seems like a lot, but not after 360 months, right? So we're going to go alignment. Let's go ahead and center those years. So there we have that. And let's see if I spelled these. I might do a spell check. So did I spell everything? Looks like it's good enough. Good enough. Okay, and then we got our total payments. Now, when we start to calculate the payments, this is where it gets tricky, because you could say, okay, I could see how to do this. I could say this has got to be equal to the sum of the payments column for everything that's in year 1, which would be this down to here. But then I'd have to do that for year 2 equals the sum of everything in year 2. And I'd have to do that 30 times, which would be, somewhat tedious. Is there anything we could do a little bit faster than that? That'll take a long time, especially if I'm scrolling down a lot. So we'll say, okay, how can I figure that out? We do the same for the interest. Interest would be the sum of the interest column for year 1, which would be from here to here. But again, going from year 2 and on gets a little bit tricky. And then the total loan reduction would be equal to the sum of the loan reduction here on down to here, which would be a little tricky. Also, I could calculate that by taking, the difference between those two, a little bit easier on that one. And then this one, the ending balance would be equal to the ending balance, which would be this one right down there. Not a sum function, but just pick up the ending balance at the end of year 1. So that's going to be, so how can we basically copy that down? So one way we can kind of think about this, and this isn't perfect, but it'll do the job. We could say, okay, well, what cell are we here? We're in F4 to F15, F4 to F15. And let's actually do it, because this one, the payments are going to be the same each time. Let's do it with the interest. Interest is going to be in G4 to G15. So I'm going to put on the right-hand side our starting point. Hold on a second. Don't delete that. Which is going to be G4 and G15. G16, was it 16? G15. So I'm just going to say 4 and 15 over here. Those are our cells that we're in. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so I can see my data. And then I'm just going to add 12 each time. So I'm going to say this equals the 4 plus 12. And this equals 15 plus 12. And if I copy that all the way down, I add 12 each time, I could see where my cells should basically end on each of these items. So in other words, if I copied this one down, it's not gonna be right there, because it just took it one cell down, and I got to bring it all the way down. I got to bring that list all the way down here. But I know what I should be at. I should be at 16 and 27. So I could say, all right, let's make this 16 and then 27. And that should do it for us. So that starts right at the first item on year 2 and brings us down to the bottom of year 2. So somewhat of a tedious method here, but not too bad to do it 30 times. So what I'll do is I'll copy this down. I'll copy this down to 30. And then I got to change each of those cell references in accordance with our numbers on the left. So I'll try to do it fairly quickly. It's a bit tedious. It's a lot easier to use pivot tables and whatnot, but this is one method we could use. We could say, and now also to get in this cell, I could say F2 on the keyboard. I'm going to try to do this as fast as I can because we'll do it many times. This will be G28 to G39, which I'm picking from the data set on the right. And then this one, I'm going to select F4 on the keyboard so I don't have to double click with the mouse, is going to be 40. And then 51. And then this one, I'm going to select F4. And I'm going to select, F2 on the keyboard, which is going to be 52 and 63. And then this one, F2 on the keyboard. And these are going to be going to 64. Whoops, I hit F2 again. 64 on the keyboard. This should be 64. And then 75. And then F2 on the keyboard. This should be 76 and 87. F4 on the keyboard. This should be 88 and 99. F4 on the keyboard. This is going to be 100 and 111. F4 on the keyboard. This is going to be 112 and 123. F4 on the keyboard. This is going to be 124 and 135. F4 on the keyboard. That's going to be 136 and 147. F4 on the keyboard. This is going to be 148 and 159. F4 on the keyboard. This is going to be 160 and 171. F4 on the keyboard. This is 172 and 183. F4 on the keyboard. We've got 184 and 195. And then enter. F4 on the keyboard. This is going to be 196 and 207. F4 on the keyboard. This is going to be 208 and 219. F4 on the keyboard. This is going to be 220 and then 231. F4 on the keyboard. Few more times here. 232 and then we've got 243. F4 on the keyboard. 244 and 255. F4 on the keyboard. 256 and 267. F4, we've got 268 and 279. F4, F2 I should say, F2 280 and 291. And then F2 on the keyboard. This is going to be 292 and 303. F2 on the keyboard. This is going to be 304 and 315. F2 on the keyboard. This is 316 and 327. F2 on the keyboard. Few more times. 328 and 339. F2. This is going to be 340 and 351. And finally, F2, 352 and 363. Now we could check this and sum this up. We could say, let's see if I added this up properly, if I didn't mess anything up, I should be able to total this, summing this up, and it should equal the same total of the 373,023, and that should match the 373,023 that we got here. So that looks good. We can also kind of pick one of these, column 10 or year 10, and see if it picks up the correct number set for the tens. So it looks like it does indeed. So again, bit tedious to do that, but that's one method we can use. Once we have that, we can simply copy these across. So I can select this entire thing, and I can use my autofill. I can use my autofill to drag it to the left. Now these are all going to be the same. So if I double click on these items, so there it is for year 4. They're all the same because the payments are the same. And then I could select this whole thing again, drag it to the right, autofill it to the right. And so there we got our payments. So there we have these two. Now we could autofill it. So there we have that for year 2. That looks correct. And then the ending balance is it's a little bit tricky because now we're pulling that end number. So we could do the same thing, but just pull in the end number. It's also easier just to recalculate it, however. So if this is going to be at the end of year 1, if that's at the end of year 1, and in year 2 we had a loan reduction of that 6203, we could just subtract these two out. So this is going to be equal to the prior balance minus the 6203, and that'll give us the 387,895. And if I do that all the way down, this equals the prior balance minus the loan reduction. We could just copy that on down, putting our cursor on the fill handle and dragging it all down. If this is done properly, we should get to 0 at the bottom. So it gets to 0 at the bottom. That looks correct. We can total these up. I'm going to put my total column here and drag this to the right. And I'm also going to drag it all the way to the left. I'm not going to drag it to the total because this is not a summing column over here. We can underline these cells possibly. Go into the Home tab, Font Group, and underline. We might use our check numbers. We might want to check this to the totals we got in the long amortization table, this being equal to. Now I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the amortization table and saying that's going to be that total here for the 773023. So that looks correct. And then I'm going to copy this across. This is the bottom of our long amortization table, just to give us a double check, and it looks like, those numbers look correct. So now let's go ahead and format this. I'm going to select these cells and then make them blue by going to the font group. We're going to hit the bucket, make them that blue, which is once again in the more items. It's that blue right there in the standard area. Putting brackets around them, font group, and put brackets around them. I'll do the same thing down here for these items. Let's make them blue and put brackets around them, and there we have it. So a bit of a tedious kind of process to get that first item in there, but again, we can do it without pivot tables that way, and then we get this nice breakout on a year by year for just a 30-year to kind of sum that up, which is useful for yearly projections and tax calculations and whatnot, spending, budgeting, basically on a yearly type of basis. Now, we can get to this information a little bit differently if we were to use tables using things like splitters and pivot tables. So in a future presentation, we'll put something similar to this together, and then when we build it, we will construct it in a way that we're going to be eyeing towards the implementation of a table and then making pivot tables or splitters, which might give us a look at this information a little bit quicker.